Hi everyone, and welcome to week 5 of our course. I first just want to mention at the end of this week we'll be halfway through the course. It always sneaks up on me. I hope that all of you are feeling on top of it and feeling comfortable with what we've covered so far. As I had mentioned, we are now going to start moving into training design. The first half was really focused on intercultural concepts, but now we're going to really start digging into some design concepts starting this week with understanding intelligences and ways of knowing and learning styles and all that sort of thing, so we can design programs or trainings accordingly. Quick comments off of week 4. There was some really great dialogue and some really good illustrations as usual. You are all wonderful storytellers. I get caught up in some of these stories that you're sharing every week, so I thank you for that. On our face-saving discussion, as some of you pointed out, there were some differences of opinions of the type of face-saving you saw going on in the office clip that we showed, the UK version. Thank you for your good humor in using that as our example. If you have other ideas for examples that I should use next time, I'm totally open to them. But I think it's kind of a lighthearted look at some face-saving practices and some blatantly ignored face-saving practices that don't happen. One thing I noticed was all of you focused on individual face-saving, and Stella Tingtoomey in the reading we had last week looks at that, but I did want to highlight the concept of face-saving originally came from, is highlighted most in Asian cultures, where protecting another's face is even sometimes more important than saving your own face. There's almost a reliance on some cultures that other people will be saving your face and you don't need to. Sometimes we see this reflected in people and cultures who will put themselves down intentionally and say, oh, I did this wrong, or this is poorly created, or they throw a party and they're like, oh, the food is no good, and all those sorts of things. But it's left to the guests and whoever to be like, no, it's wonderful, it's great, everything's perfect. And so the person, the individual throwing the party or commenting on themselves is actually kind of pulling themselves down, waiting for a traditional face-saving by everybody else. And for the most part, that happens. If it doesn't happen, then that's a huge faux pas. If you are traveling to cultures that rely on others to save face for you, make sure that you are saving others' face when they put themselves down, because that's what's expected. So we didn't talk a lot about other face saving this week. We talked more about things people will do to save their own face. So I just wanted to make sure that that dynamic is clear. And for an example in our video, one thing that I noticed first and foremost in the office clip is that throughout the whole thing, the trainer, I think his name was Rowan, is standing up there talking, right, while David, the manager, is talking alongside him, talking over him, and keeps talking and talking. It's like the most obnoxious thing you can imagine. It's painful to even watch, knowing it's like a funny video. But one thing Rowan does is keeps on going and doesn't acknowledge that this is annoying and he can't cover anything. He doesn't shut David down. And that I saw as Rowan trying to save David's face, recognizing David's the manager, so I'm going to go along with this. I can't get my job done, but as long as, maybe if I can kind of help him feel more secure, maybe I can get through it. So I thought that might be an example. The problem with kind of interpreting that video or interpreting face-saving practices anywhere is it makes us assume intent, right? At the end of the day, we don't know why anybody's doing these things. We can And I think that's what got into some of the contradictions all of you had in your discussion. You're like, well, I think so-and-so was doing it for this reason. You're like, no, I had thought he was doing it so that he looked like a valuable partner or something like that. So we can't know, and I don't claim to be an expert at interpreting face-saving practices, and I don't know that anybody does, unless you've studied it for a long time and done all the coding that you need to. But I think it was a good discussion, but please do remember that face-saving is something that happens for others, not just for yourself. And that's even more important in some non-US American cultures. In terms of dialectics, I think we had a great discussion on individualism and collectivism. And I highlighted, again, some of the differences we'd see in a non-US American culture. I noticed a lot of you were starting to really identify with the collectivistic culture. And I think that that's great. I don't think that that's wrong. I want to make sure that we don't make any of these dialectics into good and bad. Like, oh, it's selfish to be individualistic, but it's nice to be collectivistic. That's not really what's happening on that spectrum. You could critique problems with a very individualistic culture and a very collectivistic culture, but be careful before you start kind of labeling the different types on the dialectical scales. But as I pointed out, and some of you kind of came back around and said, well, you know, if we think about the collectivism as the family making decisions for the individual and all the individual's decisions being made to support the family culture, then maybe I'm not as collectivistic as I thought. I would say being individualistic or on the individualistic side of things does not mean that you don't care about community. It's just a way of thinking. It's not being uncaring about other people. I mean, I guess if we could polarize these things as much as possible, you could say like individualists in their truest nature always are out for themselves. But in reality, none of us who would probably more identify with individualistic side of things, myself included, would say that all that matters to me is me. So the other thing this brings up is that, and you guys picked this out, is that it's not so straightforward, right? It doesn't feel comfortable to pick a spot on the spectrum and say, this is where I am every time. I'm always like 30% on the individualistic side or down the scale. It's difficult. It's all relative to who else you're putting on the scale and where you're identifying those two sides, but it also is challenging because I don't think that anybody's clearly defined all of the aspects of all of these dialectics. They're just kind of general themes that we see changing in different types of cultures. So I think it's great that we're questioning it and pointing out the complexities of kind of identifying these different pieces. Lastly, on the training thread from last week, I think that we saw some good ideas. I noticed that not a lot of you jumped in on that one, although it's only Saturday, so we'll see if anybody jumps in. We don't have any real clear designs. I'm seeing some discussion of times you saw a conversation or a training that you participated in. And I'd like for us to start getting into some more designs and learning experiences that we have. I think we're going to start just naturally doing that because we're talking more about design. And I'm guessing that we've kind of hesitated to give a whole lot of training specifics until now because we haven't, as a class, gotten into any real specifics, like the exercise or the module with the instructions I gave you. This last week was probably the first clear training module instructions that I'd shared with you. So I think we'll start moving into some more concrete things, but just know that that's kind of where my expectations are headed. So not that you have to follow any sort of formula. I'm really looking for these creative ideas. I think some of my best trainings have come out of crazy ideas like
my intercultural comedy club, which we'll discuss a little later on, was something that I just kind of created with learners in mind and with a learning outcome. But I just used some different ideas to create a training. So don't feel like you have to be by the book when you're creating these sorts of trainings. I think that the more creative you can be, the better trainer you can be, and definitely the better training designer you can be. So we're headed in that direction. We're getting more concrete, and I think we're on track so far. So that is the week 4.